Rachel entered the Riverside courthouse 5 months pregnant, wearing my ordination cross, and smiled at the church elders in the gallery like she was walking down the aisle again. I remember the weight of that moment, the fluorescent lights overhead, the smell of floor wax and old wood, the way sound seemed to move through water. 23 church members had come to watch, board members, deacons, people who'd been with us for 15 years, people who'd watched me build Grace Community from 200 members to 8,000, people who'd bought my books about marriage, people who'd attended our conferences. Rachel's hand rested on her belly. The cross necklace, rose gold with a small emerald-cut diamond, caught the light as she moved. I'd placed that around her neck 15 years ago when I became senior pastor. We'd stood in the sanctuary, just the two of us before the ordination service, and I'd said, "We're in this together, partners in ministry." The worship pastor who got her pregnant was sitting in the back corner, Jonathan Pierce. John, 36 years old. I'd hired him 20 months ago because his musical talent impressed the board, because he could lead a congregation into worship, because I trusted him. The judge, Marcus Robinson, cleared his throat. "Counsel, are we ready to proceed?" My attorney stood. Robert Chen had been with our family for years, handled the church's legal work, knew every detail of what we were about to present. He reached for the first envelope on the table. That's when I knew there was no going back. 8 weeks earlier, I'd been in my office preparing a sermon on grace when Maggie Chen knocked on my door. Margaret Chen, 58, one of 2 women on our board of elders. She'd been with Grace Community since the beginning, back when we met in a rented elementary school cafeteria. "Pastor David, do you have a minute?" I looked up from my notes. "Always Maggie, come in." She closed the door behind her. That should have been my first warning. Maggie never closed doors. She believed in transparency, in conducting church business where anyone could witness it. She sat down across from my desk and placed a folder between us. I was doing the quarterly financial review. "There's something you need to see." The folder contained church credit card statements. Rachel had a card. She was women's ministry director, ran conferences, coordinated events. She needed access to funds, but Maggie had gone through 3 months of statements, and certain charges were highlighted. Yellow marker for conferences, pink for hotels. "There are 11 hotel charges here," Maggie said. Her voice was steady, careful. I cross-referenced them with our conference calendar. "Pastor David, none of these dates match conferences we actually held." I looked at the highlighted lines. The paper felt normal under my fingers, standard office stock, slightly smooth, but the information on it made my vision narrow. $400 at a Marriott in San Diego, $600 at a Hilton in Santa Barbara, $300 at a boutique hotel in Palm Springs. "There might be an explanation," I said. I pulled 6 months of statements. The pattern goes back 14 months. She turned pages, the staples in the corner making small metallic sounds. Total charges related to these hotels and restaurants, $18,000. $18,000 of church money, money given by people who worked 2 jobs to tithe. Money meant for ministry, for helping single mothers and funding mission trips and keeping the lights on. "I need to talk to Rachel," I said. Maggie's expression was careful, sympathetic. "David, I'm not just showing you hotel charges. Look at the dates." She pointed to a line highlighted in pink. "This one's from September 23rd. Remember that day?" I did. September 23rd. Rachel had told me she was attending a women's ministry conference in Los Angeles. I'd been at the church leading a board retreat. I'd called her that evening to check in, and she'd told me about the speaker, about how inspired she felt. "That conference didn't exist," Maggie said quietly. I checked. There was no women's ministry conference in LA that weekend. The credit card showed she'd been at a hotel in Laguna Beach instead. I confronted Rachel that evening at our home. Hannah was at youth group, our daughter, 16 years old, homeschooled, innocent in ways that made my chest ache thinking about it. The house was quiet. Just me and the woman I'd been married to for 18 years. I laid the credit card statements on the kitchen counter. "Maggie showed me these today." Rachel glanced at them, then at me. For just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, calculation. "David, I can explain." $18,000, I said. 11 hotels, no conferences. "You're gone all the time." Her voice shifted, became defensive. "You're at the church, at counseling sessions, at board meetings. When was the last time you asked how I was doing? When was the last time you saw me as Rachel, not just the pastor's wife? That's not an explanation for where you were. She turned away, stared out the kitchen window. You're emotionally absent. You've been emotionally absent for years. I'd prepared for denial. I'd prepared for excuses. But I hadn't prepared for her to turn it on me, to make this about my failures as a husband. And the worst part was, there was truth in it. I had been absent. Building a church from 200 to 8,000 members requires everything you have. Late nights, weekends, crisis counseling at 2 a.m. I'd given the church my best and given Rachel what was left. But that didn't explain the hotels. I opened another folder. This one I'd found myself, searching through Rachel's belongings after Maggie's revelation. I'd felt like a thief in my own home, but something told me to keep looking. Instagram screenshots, printed on glossy photo paper, organized in a white binder with clear sheet protectors. When I turned the pages, they made a slick sound, and the ink had that faint, sweet chemical smell of fresh printing. Rachel had a private Instagram account, one she'd never mentioned. The photos showed a different life. Rachel at the beach in San Diego, the same weekend as one hotel charge. Rachel at a restaurant in Santa Barbara, another hotel charge matched. And in several photos, partially cropped but visible, a man's arm around her shoulders. A watch I recognized. John wore that same watch, had worn it when leading worship just last Sunday. I slid the binder across the counter to her. She looked at the first page, saw herself smiling at a camera, carefree, young-looking, happy in a way I hadn't seen her look in years. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. That's not who I really am. Then who are you, Rachel? Because I'm looking at these photos and I'm reading the captions. Finally being seen. More than a title. And I'm realizing I have no idea who you really are. She looked at me then, and for a moment I saw something like pity in her eyes. You never did, David. You never saw me. You saw your wife, the pastor's wife, the woman who stood beside you on stage. But me? The actual me? You haven't seen her in years. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself, to list all the ways I'd tried to be a good husband. But standing in our kitchen, looking at those photos of my wife with another man, I realized she might be right. I'd stopped seeing Rachel somewhere along the way. I'd started seeing the role she played, but she'd stopped seeing me too. She'd stopped seeing our marriage, our vows, our daughter. She'd only seen what she was missing. Have you ever realized the person you thought you knew best was a complete stranger? If you felt that gut punch of discovering someone you loved was living a double life, just type stranger in the comments. You're not alone in that pain. The next morning, I met with Hannah at the church. She'd asked if she could practice piano before youth group, and I'd said yes, grateful for the excuse to see her away from the tension at home. She was in the piano room when I arrived, playing one of the worship songs she'd help arrange for Sunday service. The sanctuary lights filtered through the windows, catching on her hands as they moved across the keys. And there, on her right hand, was the purity ring I'd given her when she was 13. Sterling silver with a small diamond chip, engraved inside, "True love waits. Dad." She saw me watching and smiled, that open, trusting smile that made me want to protect her from everything dark in the world. "Hey, Dad, I'm working on the bridge for Sunday. Want to hear?" I sat down beside her. "Always." She played through the section, and her ring made tiny clinking sounds against the piano keys. When she finished, she turned to me. "So, is everything okay? Mom's been acting weird lately." I forced my expression to stay neutral. "Weird how?" "I don't know. Distant. She's on her phone a lot, and she keeps saying she needs space, needs time to herself." Hannah twisted the purity ring on her finger, a habit she had when she was thinking through something. "Dad, you and Mom are the reason I believe love is real. That marriage can actually work. That's never going to change, right?" My throat went tight. "Hannah, because there are girls at youth group whose parents are divorced, and they're so cynical about relationships. But I always tell them about you and Mom, about how you guys lead marriage conferences, about how you choose each other every day even when it's hard." She looked at me with those clear, believing eyes. "That's true, right? You and Mom are solid?" I wanted to lie. God help me. I wanted to tell her everything was fine, that her foundation was secure, that the example she'd built her understanding of love on was real. But I'd spent 15 years teaching about truth, about integrity, about not performing righteousness, but living it. Hannah, sweetheart, your mom and I are going through some things right now, adult things, but I promise you, whatever happens, my love for you never changes. You understand that? Her smile faltered. You're scaring me a little. I'm sorry, I don't mean to. I put my arm around her shoulders. Keep playing. That bridge is beautiful. She turned back to the piano, but I saw her twist the ring again, harder this time. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how wrong yet. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week, but after the credit card discovery, I'd called an emergency session. 12 board members sat around the conference table in the church's administrative building. Maggie, Andrew Reynolds, my associate pastor and closest friend, 3 other pastors, 7 lay leaders who'd been with us for years, and at the head of the table, me, with the evidence folders in front of me and a choice that would define everything. Andrew spoke first. David, before we start, I want you to know we're here to support you, whatever you need. I appreciate that. I opened the first folder. You've all seen the financial irregularities Maggie found. What you don't know is that I've confirmed Rachel has been having an affair. The room went silent. Someone, I think it was Tom Bradley, one of the deacons, sucked in a sharp breath. With John Pierce, I continued, our worship pastor. More silence, then murmuring. I saw shock on their faces, saw the same disbelief I'd felt when I first understood what was happening. Maggie spoke. David, I'm so sorry, but we need to address this systematically. Have you consulted with legal counsel? Yes, Robert Chen has advised me to file for divorce and to document everything, which brings me to this. I pulled out another folder, the one that had arrived from Robert's office just that morning. We subpoenaed phone records, Rachel's and John's. I opened it. The printed phone records were dozens of pages, single-spaced. When I spread them out on the table, they made that crisp sound of fresh printer paper. Dates and times in the left column, message fragments in the right column, reconstructed from carrier data. 8,300 text messages over 14 months. Andrew leaned forward, reading. His face went pale. David, some of these are from during Sunday services, while you were preaching. I know. Tom Bradley found a highlighted section. This one says... He stopped, looked at me. Do you want me to read it? Go ahead. Tom's voice was tight. Rachel to John, dated February 14th. Once I'm pregnant, he'll settle for anything to avoid scandal. John's response. Are you sure about this? Rachel, David will never know, or if he does, it'll be too late. Maybe a baby would give me something that's mine, not the church's. The room erupted, voices overlapping, questions, disbelief. Someone said Rachel's name like a curse. I held up my hand for silence. That message was sent 3 weeks before she conceived. The pregnancy hadn't been an accident. It had been planned, a calculated move in a game I hadn't known we were playing. Stephen Thompson stood up. Rachel's father, 69 years old, one of our biggest donors, a man who'd pledged $2 million to our building expansion. His face was red. This is a private matter, he said. David, you're hurting. I understand. But dragging this before the board, making it public, think about what you're doing to Rachel. Think about the church's reputation. I am thinking about the church, I said quietly. I'm thinking about the 8,000 people who trust me to lead with integrity. I'm thinking about the couples who've sat in my office for counseling, who've read my books, who've built their marriages on principles Rachel and I claim to live by. Then settle this quietly, Stephen said. Resign, take a sabbatical, let Rachel keep her position. No one needs to know the details. I looked at him, at this man who'd been in our lives for 18 years, who'd walked Rachel down the aisle, who'd held Hannah when she was born, and I realized he was more interested in protecting his daughter's image than in addressing what she'd done. I reached for my Bible, the leather-bound ESV I'd been given at my ordination, burgundy cover worn soft at the edges. When I opened it, the spine creaked, that sound of well-loved books. The pages were thin, almost translucent, and every margin was filled with notes in my own handwriting. 15 years of sermon preparation. I found John 8:32, the verse I'd preached on dozens of times, the verse I'd built my entire ministry around. The truth will set you free, I read aloud. Then I looked up at the board, at Stephen, at all of them. I've preached these words for 15 years. I've told couples sitting in crisis that honesty is the foundation of healing. I've told our congregation that integrity means doing the right thing even when it costs you everything. My voice didn't shake. I'm not resigning. I'm fighting. I'm divorcing Rachel. I'm asking for John's immediate termination. And I'm going to tell our congregation the truth, appropriately with dignity, but the truth. Because if I compromise now, everything I've taught them becomes a lie. Stephen's voice was ice. I'll withdraw my building pledge, $2 million. Keep your money, Stephen. I'm keeping my integrity. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he walked out. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Finally, Maggie spoke. I move that we accept Pastor David's recommendation to terminate John Pierce's employment, effective immediately. All in favor? Every hand went up except the one empty chair where Stephen had been sitting. Motion passes, Maggie said. She looked at me with something like pride in her eyes. David, what do you need from us? Prayer, I said, and witnesses, because this is going to get worse before it gets better. I didn't know then how right I was. The independent audit came back 10 days later. I'd authorized it after the board meeting, wanting to know the full scope of what Rachel had done. Maggie had recommended a forensic accountant, someone who specialized in nonprofit financial reviews, someone who knew how to find what people tried to hide. We met in the conference room, Maggie, Andrew, myself, and the auditor, a woman named Patricia Lynn, who wore reading glasses on a chain and carried a leather portfolio that looked like it had seen 1,000 investigations. She laid the bound report on the table between us. Clear plastic cover, 45 pages, sections tabbed with colored tabs. When she opened it, the binding made a cracking sound. The pages had that slight chemical smell of fresh photocopies, and the tabs had a distinctive plastic texture. I'll be direct, Patricia said. Mrs. Shepard had access to a discretionary ministry fund of approximately $30,000 annually. This fund was designated for women's ministry expenses, retreats, conferences, counseling support, emergency assistance for women in crisis. She flipped to a tabbed section. Yellow highlighter marked line after line. Over 14 months, she withdrew or charged $12,000 from this fund for personal expenses. Spa treatments in La Jolla, $2,300, jewelry purchases, $3,100, hotel room upgrades beyond what the church rate allowed, $4,200, restaurant charges that exceed any reasonable ministry context, $2,400. Andrew's voice was quiet. She stole from women in crisis to fund her affair. The audit shows a clear pattern, Patricia continued. Many of these charges coincide with hotel stays we've already identified. She was using church funds to upgrade rooms, to pay for romantic dinners, to... She paused, chose her words carefully. To create an experience. Maggie's hands were flat on the table. Can we recover any of it? That's a legal question, but I found something else. Patricia turned to another tab. In December, there was a reimbursement to the fund, $4,000. It came from Stephen Thompson's personal account. The room went still. Stephen knew? I said. The timing suggests he discovered some discrepancy and covered it to avoid questions. I can't prove he knew about the affair, but he knew about financial irregularities. My father-in-law had known Rachel was stealing from the church, and instead of confronting it, instead of bringing it to the board, he'd quietly covered $4,000 to protect her reputation. I thought about his face in the board meeting, his demand that I settle quietly, his threat to withdraw his pledge. He hadn't been protecting the church. He'd been protecting his daughter from consequences he knew she deserved. 2 days later, Andrew came to my office holding a folder. His expression was troubled. I went to John's office to pack up his things. The board asked me to handle it since you've got enough on your plate. He sat down across from my desk. I found this. He handed me a single sheet of paper, folded into quarters, the crease lines sharp from being handled repeatedly. Coffee stain in one corner, brown and circular. The paper felt standard weight, but somehow heavy. I unfolded it. It was a resignation letter, dated 4 months ago. November 3rd. To the Grace Community Board of Elders, it is with deep regret that I submit my resignation as worship pastor, effective immediately. I have engaged in conduct unbecoming of a church leader. I have violated the trust you placed in me and betrayed the confidence of this congregation. What I have done is wrong, and I cannot continue in ministry while living a lie. I am profoundly sorry for the pain this will cause. I pray you will find someone worthy of leading worship, because I am not that person. Jonathan Pierce. Below the typed text were handwritten notes. Crossed out sections, edits. One line read, "I can't do this anymore." But it was scratched out. Another said, "She won't let me," also crossed out. "He never submitted it," Andrew said quietly. 4 months ago, John tried to end this. He wrote the letter, edited it, agonized over it, but he couldn't follow through. I stared at the coffee stain. Imagine John sitting at his desk at 3 in the morning, drinking cold coffee, trying to find the courage to do the right thing, and failing. "There's more," Andrew said. He pulled out another paper, sheet music, staff paper with musical notes and lyrics written below in blue ink. Several lines were crossed out. Another coffee cup ring stained the top. "I found this in the same drawer. It's a worship song he wrote. Never performed it." I read the lyrics. "Two worlds colliding forbidden, but right I'd burn it all down, just to hold you tonight. What we have is stolen, but it feels like mine. I'm caught between heaven and crossing the line." At the bottom, in small handwriting, "For our week of 2/20, February 20th. The week Rachel conceived." "He was romanticizing it," I said. "This wasn't guilt. This was—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Andrew's voice was gentle. "It was both, I think. He felt guilty enough to write a resignation letter, but he wanted it enough to write a love song. John's not a villain, David. He's just weak, and weakness in the face of temptation can be just as destructive as malice." I thought about that, about how much simpler this would be if John were simply evil, if Rachel were simply a monster. But they weren't. They were broken people who'd made choices, who'd hurt others, who'd tried and failed to be better. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it made it more tragic somehow. That afternoon, Stephen Thompson came to my office unannounced. He didn't knock, just walked in like he owned the place, which, given his donation history, he probably felt he did. He dropped a piece of paper on my desk, a formal letter on his attorney's letterhead. "Withdrawal of pledge commitment," he said. $2 million, effective immediately. And I'm taking 40 families with me. Good families, donors, volunteers, people who've been here since the beginning. I didn't pick up the letter. Is this supposed to change my mind? This is supposed to wake you up to reality. You're destroying the church over a personal matter. Rachel made a mistake. Yes, a big one. But you're being vindictive, you're being cruel, and you're doing it under the banner of integrity. A mistake? I stood up. "Stephen, she didn't make a mistake. She planned a pregnancy with another man while married to me. She stole $12,000 from a fund meant to help women in crisis. She was hurting." His voice rose. "You were never there, David. Always at the church, always counseling other people's marriages while yours fell apart. Rachel needed you, and you gave her nothing. So yes, she found comfort somewhere else." Is that really so unforgivable? I wanted to yell. I wanted to list every way his logic was twisted, every way he was enabling his daughter's worst choices. But I looked at him and saw something I recognized. A father desperate to believe his daughter was still good. I'd be that father soon enough. When Hannah learned the truth, I'd want to protect her too, to soften the blow, to make it hurt less. "Stephen," I said quietly, "I failed Rachel in some ways. I'll own that. I was absent emotionally. I prioritized ministry over marriage. But her response to my failure wasn't to have a conversation, to go to counseling, to fight for us. It was to have an affair, plan a pregnancy as leverage, and steal from the church. Those are choices, her choices." On my desk were the marriage conference brochures, glossy trifold pamphlets with full-color photos of Rachel and me smiling, quotes about 15 years of faithful marriage and choosing each other daily and walking through hard times together. 500 of them, printed for a conference scheduled in 6 weeks that I'd already canceled. I picked one up. The glossy paper felt smooth, cold, made a slick sound when I handled it. Slight chemical smell from the printing. "Look at this," I said, holding it up. "This is what you want me to protect. This image, this lie. These smiling faces selling something we never had." I met his eyes. I won't do it, Stephen. I won't stand in front of 800 couples and teach them about marriage integrity while living a fraud. I won't keep your daughter's secrets at the cost of my soul. Then you're a fool. Stephen grabbed the letter, pushed it toward me. $2 million, 40 families, your choice. Keep your money, Stephen. I'm keeping my integrity. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up one of the conference brochures, looked at our smiling faces, and dropped it back on the desk like it burned him. You'll regret this, he said. After he left, I sat in my office surrounded by 500 brochures advertising a marriage that never existed. And I realized I'd been performing too. Not as egregiously as Rachel, but performing nonetheless. I'd let the image of successful pastor with model marriage matter more than the reality of an actual struggling human relationship. That didn't excuse what Rachel had done, but it meant I had my own repenting to do. Easter was 3 weeks away, our biggest Sunday of the year. 3,000 people in the sanctuary, 15,000 watching online. Every year, I preached on resurrection, on new life, on hope emerging from death. This year, everyone would be watching to see if I'd address the rumors, because by now, the entire church knew something was wrong. John's sudden departure, Rachel's absence from women's ministry events, my request that the board pray for my family. In a church of 8,000, secrets lasted about 48 hours. I sat at my desk with my Bible open to John 8:32, the verse I'd quoted at the board meeting, the verse that had defined my ministry. The truth will set you free. But what did that mean when truth would hurt so many people? When it would shatter my daughter's faith? When it would force our congregation to reckon with the fact that their pastor's marriage was a fraud? My annotations in the margins went back 15 years. Blue ink from my first year as pastor. Truth, like foundation of trust. Black ink from the middle years. Transparency builds authentic community. Pencil from recent months. But at what cost? I'd underlined the verse so many times the paper was almost worn through. Dr. Lisa Hamilton, the Christian therapist I'd asked to work with Hannah, had told me something the previous week. David, there's a difference between truth-telling and truth-dumping. Your congregation deserves truth, but they don't need every detail. The question isn't whether to be honest. It's how to be honest in a way that honors everyone's dignity, including Rachel's. I picked up my pen and wrote in the margin, Easter sermon title, The Truth Will Set You Free. 8,000 people would hear what I was about to say, including Rachel, including Hannah, including the families who'd decide whether to stay or leave based on how I handled this. I had 3 weeks to figure out how to tell the truth without destroying everything. The rumors reached Hannah 2 days later. She came home from a youth group planning meeting with red eyes. I was in my home office when I heard her come in, heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard her bedroom door close. Then, a few minutes later, a knock on my office door. Dad, can we talk? She sat down across from my desk, twisted the purity ring on her finger, that nervous habit that meant she was processing something difficult. The girls at youth group were talking, she said. Her voice was small. They said Mom's been having an affair with John Pierce. They said that's why he left so suddenly. They said... She stopped, swallowed. They said Mom's pregnant, and it's his baby. My chest went tight. Hannah? Is it true? She looked at me with those clear, believing eyes, the ones that had always seen the best in everyone, especially her parents. Tell me it's not true. Tell me they're just gossiping, making things up because they don't understand. I couldn't lie to her. Not after everything I'd said about truth and integrity. It's true, I said quietly. She went very still. Like if she didn't move, didn't breathe, the words would somehow unhappen. Mom and John had an affair? Yes. And she's pregnant with his baby? Yes. But, her voice cracked. But you guys lead marriage conferences. You wrote books about staying faithful. You told me... She looked down at the purity ring on her finger. You gave me this when I was 13. You told me to save myself for marriage because that's what honors God. Because sex is sacred. Because commitment matters. She twisted the ring harder. You and Mom led purity retreats. You stood in front of hundreds of teenagers and told us to wait, to be pure, to keep our promises. Now Mom's pregnant by the worship pastor, and I'm supposed to... What? Still believe any of it? I came around the desk, tried to sit beside her, but she stood up. Hannah, sweetheart, don't. Tears were streaming down her face now. If your marriage was a lie, Was purity culture a lie? Was all of it just performance? You stood at that purity retreat 3 years ago and told us our worth was tied to our choices, that staying pure meant we were honoring God and honoring our future spouse. But Mom didn't honor you. She didn't honor God. So, what does that make all those things you taught me? She pulled the ring off her finger, sterling silver catching the lamplight one last time, and then she placed it on my desk. The sound of silver hitting wood. I'll never forget it. A tiny clink. Final. Like something breaking. Dad, how do I trust anything? Her voice was barely a whisper. My whole faith is built on the idea that God honors faithfulness, that doing the right thing matters, that marriage is sacred. If your marriage wasn't real, if Mom could violate all of that and you didn't even see it happening, then how do I know what's real? How do I trust my own judgment? How do I... She couldn't finish. I stood there, the purity ring between us on the desk, and I had no answer that wouldn't break her more. Hannah, listen to me. I kept my voice gentle. Real faith isn't shattered by hypocrisy. It's refined by it. Your mother's choices don't invalidate the principles you've been taught. They just show that knowing the right thing doesn't always mean doing the right thing, that we're all human, all broken, all in need of grace. I don't want grace right now, she said. I want it to not be true. I want to go back to 3 hours ago when I still believed in you and Mom, when I thought love was real. Love is real, sweetheart. My love for you, that's real. God's love, that's real. Your mom and I struggled for words. We're proof that even people who know better can fail. But that doesn't mean the truth we taught you isn't still true. She looked at the purity ring on my desk. That ring meant something because you and Mom made it mean something. You gave it to me and I wore it. And every time I looked at it, I thought about the marriage you guys had, the partnership, the faithfulness. Now I look at it and all I see is a lie. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. I'm going to stay at Grandma Patricia's for a few days. I need space to think, to figure out if I believe in anything anymore. After she left, I sat alone in my office. The purity ring sat on my desk, catching the light. Engraved inside, true love waits, Dad. I'd given it to her to teach her about honor and commitment. Instead, I'd set her up to have her faith shattered when she discovered her parents were human. If you've ever questioned everything you believed because of someone else's betrayal, just type faith in the comments. You're not alone in that darkness. Easter Sunday arrived. I stood backstage in the sanctuary, listening to the pre-service music, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. 3,000 people in the pews, families who'd come to hear about resurrection and hope, visitors who'd accepted invitations, dressed up, brought their kids, regular members who'd been with us for years, board members, staff. And somewhere in the congregation, Rachel. She'd insisted on attending, said it was her right as a member. Hannah was in the tech booth running the broadcast. 15,000 people watching online. She'd come back from her grandmother's yesterday, still wearing the purity ring, but with something different in her eyes, something harder, more cautious. Andrew found me in the green room. You ready? No. I held my Bible, the leather soft and worn, the pages filled with 15 years of notes. But it's time. David, whatever you say out there, remember, they're not just listening to your words, they're watching to see if you live them. I nodded, walked out onto the stage. The sanctuary was beautiful, morning light through stained glass, flowers everywhere, Easter lilies, their smell sweet and heavy. The worship team had finished the opening songs, and now it was time for the sermon. I stood at the pulpit, gripped the wooden edges, felt them solid under my hands. Looked out at 3,000 faces. Rachel was in the third row, 5 months pregnant now. She wasn't wearing the cross necklace today. Hannah was visible through the tech booth window, her face illuminated by monitor light. I opened my Bible to John 8:32. The truth will set you free, I read aloud. Let the words hang in the air. For 15 years I've preached these words. I've told you that honesty is the foundation of trust, that integrity means doing the right thing even when it costs you everything. That authentic faith requires transparency, even when transparency is painful. I paused, let my eyes move across the congregation. This week, I learned what those words actually cost. The sanctuary was completely silent. Some of you know that my marriage is ending. You've heard rumors, some true, some exaggerated, some incomplete. I want to address that this morning because I owe you honesty. Not every detail. Some things are private, and I will protect people's dignity even in the midst of pain. But the truth, my voice stayed steady. I failed in my marriage in some significant ways. I was emotionally absent. I prioritized building this church over building my relationship with Rachel. I gave you my best and gave her what was left. Those are my failures, and I own them. I saw people nodding, saw sympathy. But I gripped the pulpit harder. Rachel responded to my failures by having an affair, by making choices that violated our vows, our family, and this church. And when I discovered it, I had to decide, do I protect the image we've built, the conferences, the books, the appearance of a successful ministry marriage, or do I live what I've taught you? Rachel's face was pale. I chose truth, because grace doesn't mean hiding sin. It means walking through consequences with dignity. It means admitting when we've failed and trusting that God can redeem even our worst moments. It means being human in front of you instead of pretending to be perfect. I looked up at Hannah in the tech booth. She was crying. So was I. Some of you will leave because of this. Some of you will feel betrayed, angry, disillusioned. I understand. I feel that too. But I'm asking you to stay, not for me, for what this community can be when we stop performing righteousness and start living it, when we stop pretending we have it all together and start admitting we're all broken people in need of a Savior who specializes in resurrection. I close my Bible. Jesus said the truth will set you free. He didn't say it would be easy. He didn't say it wouldn't hurt, but he promised it would free us from pretending, from performing, from the exhausting work of maintaining an image instead of living authentically. My voice dropped to almost a whisper. I'm modeling that today. Standing in front of you, broken and imperfect, choosing truth over reputation. And I'm inviting you to do the same. Whatever you're hiding, whatever you're ashamed of, whatever you think would disqualify you from God's love, bring it into the light, because the truth really will set you free. I stepped back from the pulpit. Let's pray. The prayer that followed was the most honest one I'd ever prayed. And when I finished, when I looked up at the congregation, I saw something I hadn't expected. Half of them were crying, not in judgment, in relief, because I'd just given them permission to be human too. The Riverside Courthouse felt different the second time. April 26th, 6 days after Easter, the divorce hearing. Rachel entered wearing a maternity dress, navy blue, professional, demure. 5 months pregnant, her hand resting on her belly like a shield. She didn't wear the cross necklace today. That performance was over, but she still smiled at the church members in the gallery, fewer now than at the preliminary hearing. Stephen Thompson sat in the back with about 15 families who'd sided with Rachel after my Easter sermon. The rest of the gallery was people who'd stayed, Maggie Chen, Andrew Reynolds, members who'd been at Grace Community since the beginning. And in the front row, just behind where I sat with Robert Chen, was Hannah. She'd turned 18 2 weeks ago. Her birthday had been quiet, just the two of us, pizza and a movie, avoiding the topic that sat between us like broken glass. But she'd come today by choice. She wanted to witness what truth looked like in its full legal weight. She was wearing the purity ring again. Judge Marcus Robinson entered, and we all stood. He was 55, former Navy officer, a man who'd seen enough of the world to have perspective on human nature. He settled into his chair and opened the case file. We're here for the dissolution of marriage between David Matthew Shepard and Rachel Ann Shepard. Counsel, are we ready to proceed? Rachel's attorney stood first. Bradley Westmore, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer Stephen's money bought. Your Honor, we are. Mrs. Shepard seeks an equitable division of assets, including partial ownership of Grace Community Church property, shared intellectual property rights to books and materials co-authored during the marriage, and substantial spousal support given her role in building Mr. Shepard's ministry career. Robert stood. Your Honor, we contest those claims. We have substantial evidence that Mrs. Shepard's conduct not only violated the marriage covenant, but also included financial misconduct involving church funds. Present your evidence, Mr. Chen. Robert laid out the folders, one by one, methodically. The way you build a case with no gaps, the credit card statements, monthly printouts, stapled, highlighted in yellow and pink. He walked the judge through 11 hotel charges, $18,000 total, none corresponding to actual ministry events, the Instagram screenshots, glossy photo paper and clear sheet protectors showing Rachel's secret life, Photos with timestamps that matched hotel charges, captions about finally being seen and being more than a title, the text message thread, pages and pages of phone records. Robert read select messages aloud. Rachel to Jonathan Pierce. Maybe a baby would give me something that's mine, not the church's. John's response, are you sure about this? Rachel, David will never know, or if he does, it'll be too late. Timestamp, 3 weeks before the conception. The courtroom was silent. I heard someone in the gallery gasp, saw Rachel's face go white. Robert continued, Your Honor, the pregnancy was premeditated, planned as leverage in what Mrs. Shepherd anticipated would be a lucrative divorce settlement. He presented the audit report, bound pages with colored tabs, official letterhead, walked through $12,000 in misappropriated church funds, spa treatments, jewelry, hotel upgrades, all during the affair, all using money designated for women in crisis. Bradley tried to interrupt. Your Honor, Mrs. Shepherd was emotionally abandoned. My client's husband was married to his ministry, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. I've heard enough. Judge Robinson's voice cut through the courtroom. He removed his glasses, set them on the bench. Mr. Westmore, I've read the pretrial briefs. I've reviewed the evidence, and I need to say something before I rule. He looked at Rachel. Mrs. Shepherd, I'm a Navy veteran. I spent 20 years in uniform before I went to law school. I know something about service, about sacrifice, about the difficulty of balancing calling and family. His voice was measured, controlled. I also know something about honor. Rachel's hands were shaking. You stood beside your husband while he built a ministry serving 8,000 people. You wore the title of pastor's wife. You spoke at conferences teaching other women about faithfulness. And behind that facade, you conducted a 14-month affair, planned a pregnancy as a business transaction, and stole $12,000 from funds meant to help vulnerable women. He paused. Let that sink in. You wore family heirlooms to this courthouse at the preliminary hearing, your husband's ordination gift, while carrying another man's child. That's not merely infidelity, Mrs. Shepherd. That's calculated mockery. You exploited not just your husband's trust, but an entire community's faith. Bradley started to speak, but the judge held up his hand. This court recognizes that marital failure is rarely one-sided. The evidence suggests Mr. Shepherd was emotionally absent, overly focused on ministry at the expense of his marriage. Those are real failures. Judge Robinson looked at me. But emotional absence doesn't justify theft. It doesn't justify planning a pregnancy as leverage. It doesn't justify exploiting sacred trust for personal gain. He put his glasses back on. Here's my ruling. Property division. Mr. Shepherd retains full ownership of the family home with a buyout payment of $100,000 to Mrs. Shepherd to be paid over 3 years. Mrs. Shepherd has no claim to church property. She is not a founder, not ordained clergy, and her financial misconduct disqualifies any equitable interest. Intellectual property. Mr. Shepherd retains all rights to books and materials. Mrs. Shepherd may not use their co-authored work for any commercial purpose. Rachel's attorney gripped the table. Spousal support. Given Mrs. Shepherd's education, work history, and the brevity of her inability to work, combined with her financial misconduct, spousal support is set at $1,000 per month for 24 months only. After that, Mrs. Shepherd is expected to be self-supporting. He closed the file. Regarding the child Mrs. Shepherd is carrying, paternity has been established as Jonathan Pierce. Mr. Shepherd has no legal or financial obligation to this child. Custody arrangements and child support are between Mrs. Shepherd and Mr. Pierce and are not a matter for this court. He looked at both of us. This court finds in favor of Mr. Shepherd. The marriage is dissolved. Mrs. Shepherd, you are ordered to vacate the family home within 60 days. Mr. Chen, draft the final decree. The gavel came down. I sat there, feeling the weight of it. 6 months of pain, of evidence gathering, of wrestling with truth and grace and justice, and it ended with a gavel sound. Rachel stood, her attorney helping her. She didn't look at me, didn't look at Hannah, just walked out of the courtroom with her father's arm around her shoulders. Stephen gave me one cold glance as he passed. The look said, "You did this. You destroyed my daughter." But Maggie leaned forward from the gallery and whispered, "Justice, David. Finally." Hannah touched my shoulder. "Dad, can we talk? Really talk? I need to understand everything." We met at a park near the church, neutral ground. Hannah wanted space from the house, from the courthouse, from everything that felt heavy with history. We sat on a bench overlooking a duck pond. Spring afternoon, warm sun, the sound of water and children playing nearby. Normal life happening around us while we talked about things that felt anything but normal. I'd brought limited evidence, not everything, but enough. Printed summaries Robert had prepared, copies of a few key documents. Hannah was 18 now. She deserved to make informed decisions about her relationship with her mother, her faith, her future. She read through the documents quietly. The text messages showing the planned pregnancy, the audit summary showing the theft, John's resignation letter showing he'd tried to quit but couldn't. When she finished, she set the papers down between us and stared at the water. "I've been so angry at you," she said quietly, "for telling the truth, for not protecting me from it, for making Easter Sunday about this instead of just preaching about resurrection like normal. I know. But I've been thinking about what you said, about real faith being refined by hypocrisy, not shattered by it. And I talked to Dr. Hamilton, a lot, about faith and doubt and what it means to believe in something after the people who taught you that thing turn out to be human." She twisted the purity ring on her finger. The small diamond caught the sunlight. "I took this off," she said, "after you told me about Mom, because it felt like a lie. Like every time I looked at it, I was seeing your marriage and thinking that's what this ring represented. Faithfulness, honor, keeping promises. Hannah, but then I realized something." She looked at me. "This ring was never about Mom. It was about you. You're the one who gave it to me. You're the one who showed me what honor looks like. Not by being perfect, but by choosing truth even when it cost you everything. The marriage conferences, the books, the reputation, the money, the easy path. You walked away from all of it because integrity mattered more." Tears were running down her face now. "I'm wearing this ring again, Dad, not because you told me to, not because of purity culture or church expectations or anything external. I'm wearing it because I'm choosing it. It means something different now, something real." I pulled her close. "That's the difference between religion and faith, sweetheart. Religion is about performance. Faith is about conviction. I'm so proud of you." She cried against my shoulder, grief for the mother she thought she had, grief for the marriage she'd believed in, but also something like relief, the relief of knowing the truth, of not having to wonder anymore, of being able to build her faith on solid ground instead of pleasant lies. "The truth did set me free," she whispered, "just not how I expected. It freed me to choose what I believe instead of just accepting what I was told." We sat there as the sun moved lower, as the ducks settled in for evening, as the world kept turning despite everything that had broken. The consequences rippled out over the following months. Rachel lost her women's ministry position, not dramatically, just a quiet resignation accepted by the board. Her book contracts were canceled. The publisher didn't want to be associated with the scandal. She moved to Sacramento, closer to her parents, to start over somewhere people didn't know the story. John's situation was more complicated. His wife, they had been separated during the affair but not divorced, initially refused to speak to him. But something unexpected happened. She was a woman of deep faith, and after months of counseling, she chose forgiveness. Not reconciliation, they still divorced, but a kind of redemption. The baby, a boy, was born in October. John's ex-wife, Catherine, had struggled with infertility for years. After the divorce, after processing her own pain and grief, she made an extraordinary choice. She offered to help John raise his son, not as his wife, but as a co-parent. A child born from betrayal, raised by people who chose grace over bitterness. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated and required ongoing therapy and clear boundaries. But it was a baby loved and wanted, raised by people who understood their own need for redemption. Grace Community Church changed too. Stephen Thompson withdrew his pledge and took 40 families with him. People who felt I'd been too harsh, too public, too unforgiving. It hurt to watch them go. Some of them I'd baptized, married, walked through crises with, but something else happened. 600 new families came. People who'd driven past our church for years, assuming we were just another place of perfect people with perfect lives. People who'd felt too broken, too messy, too imperfect to belong in a church. My Easter sermon, and the sermons that followed, about honest faith and authentic community, resonated with them. The church didn't get smaller. It got more real. I wrote a new book, not about maintaining a perfect marriage, but about rebuilding after betrayal, about choosing truth over reputation, about the difference between authentic grace, which holds people accountable while offering paths to redemption, and cheap grace, which enables sin in the name of forgiveness. It sold better than any of my previous books. Apparently, people were hungry for honesty. And Hannah decided to defer her college plans for a year. Not because she was lost, but because she wanted to be intentional. She took classes at the community college, saw Dr. Hamilton weekly, worked at the church's community outreach program. She was rebuilding her faith from the ground up, asking the hard questions, refusing easy answers. She was becoming the kind of believer I'd always hoped to be, one who chose faith with open eyes, who loved with wisdom, who knew that truth and grace aren't opposites but partners in the work of redemption. David and Hannah redefined what faith means, not performance, but conviction. Not because someone told them to, but because they chose it. If you've ever had to rebuild your beliefs from the ground up after betrayal, if you've chosen authenticity over performance, tell me about it in the comments. Those stories matter. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about truth and grace differently, subscribe. I tell stories about courage, integrity, and the hard choices that define us. I'll see you in the next one. 1 year later, I stood in the sanctuary watching Hannah at the piano. Sunday morning service. The same sanctuary where I'd preached that Easter sermon, where everything had changed. She was leading worship now, filling in occasionally when we needed a pianist. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence, a song she'd arranged herself, a new melody about redemption and second chances. The purity ring caught the sanctuary light as she played, no longer a symbol of someone else's expectations or a performance of righteousness. Just a personal choice, a quiet conviction, a reminder that some things are worth waiting for and some promises are worth keeping. When the song ended, she looked at me in the front row and smiled. Real. Finally real. After the service, we walked to my office together. She'd been accepted to a Christian college and would start in the fall. She was excited, nervous, ready. "You know what's funny?" she said, as we walked through the church courtyard. "When all of this happened, I thought my faith would die. I thought if your marriage could be fake, then maybe God was fake too. Maybe everything was just performance. And now I know the difference. Your marriage to Mom was real. It just wasn't what you thought it was, just like my faith was real. It just wasn't as simple as I thought it was. Things can be true and complicated at the same time." She stopped, turned to face me. "You gave me something more valuable than a perfect example, Dad. You gave me an honest one. You showed me what it looks like to choose truth when lying would be easier, to choose integrity when compromise would be more comfortable, to keep walking forward even when everything's broken." Her voice softened. "Grandma would be proud of you for fighting for the truth." I thought about my mother, about the woman who'd never trusted Rachel, who'd seen something I'd missed, about legacy and what we passed down to the next generation. "Your grandma knew something I had to learn the hard way," I said, "that the truth will set you free, even when it hurts, even when it costs everything, especially then." Hannah touched the purity ring on her finger. "I'm grateful you chose truth, Dad, even when it broke me for a while, because now I know what I believe, not because someone told me to, but because I chose it. That's real faith." We walked back into the sanctuary, empty now, quiet, just the two of us and the morning light through stained glass. Hannah sat down at the piano, played a few notes. The ring made tiny clinking sounds against the keys, that sound I'd grown to love, the sound of her choosing her convictions instead of performing someone else's. "What are you playing next Sunday?" I asked. "I'm working on something new, about truth and grace, about how they're not opposites. They're the same thing, just different expressions of love." I listened as she played through a chord progression, working out the harmony, my daughter building her faith note by note, making something beautiful out of broken pieces. She looked up at me and smiled. "It's going to be okay, Dad. We're going to be okay." And I believed her, because we'd chosen truth over comfort, honesty over reputation, integrity over ease. We'd walked through fire and come out with something more valuable than what we'd lost: authenticity. The truth had set us free, just like it promised. Finally, We were real.